Hi everyone, this is Christine Harrington with the Savvy Sales Lady, back with the sales training and coach expert from the UK. And I know you all love listening to Simon talk because you sent me messages telling me. So we've got Simon White back from the UK. You're getting to be developing a fan base over here in the USA, Simon, because like the ladies like your voice.
Fantastic. Well, maybe I'll fly over and see everybody next year. That would be great.
That would be fabulous. We could do some workshops together.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Excellent. That's good. Thank you for having me, guys. It's so great to collaborate on these videos with you.
Thanks, Simon, for taking the time. And today's topic, everyone, is qualifying prospects. So, Simon, I know you probably have some stories. I've got my own stories of success and failure. So can you tell the audience, the salespeople out there, just a couple of your quick stories about qualifying prospects?
Absolutely. I wish I'd have realized early on in my career just how important qualifying prospects is. I could have saved myself a lot of shoe leather, as they say. I have driven all around the UK, seeing people who really only had an interest rather than a qualified need in what I was selling. I mean, I remember back being in my early 20s, on the phone, prospecting, day in, day out, trying to get that appointment, and you're getting pressure from your boss to say, come on, Simon, get an appointment, and you get that appointment, and the person's interested and says, oh yeah, come and see me. So you jump in the car and you go and see them, and you get your laptop out or whatever, and you do your demo of your software or whatever you're selling. And you haven't asked them any questions. You don't really know what's their buying process, or do they really have a need, or who else is involved in making the decision, or what problem they're trying to solve, or have they tried to solve it before, and have they got the money, and you don't know any of this sort of stuff, but you just go there excited and you start telling them stuff, and you're the walking, talking brochure, and you get back, and 3 weeks later, 6 weeks later, they haven't bought. Now, on the surface, it looks like you can't close a deal, but the truth is, you just didn't qualify it. You didn't ask those basic questions, some of which could have been done on the phone, or a lot of them could have been done on the phone. You didn't. You just jumped in the car and tried to sell to them without really seeing, do they really have a need? And as we know, prospects will go one way or the other. They either move away from pain or they move towards gain. And you've got to really find out what's going on. Yeah. So I've wasted a lot of time without, because I didn't qualify well enough.
Boy, that is so true. And then I'm going to share with you kind of like the other end of the scale and of qualifying prospects. And that is if they breathe and you can see steam on the mirror, they're qualified. This has been a big issue in the insurance world. So insurance brokers and agents out there that are listening to this, at one time in my life, I was an insurance agent and broker, and a lot of the people that I worked with felt like that if they were breathing, then they're qualified. And what happened was, in the insurance industry, Simon, you build your product base around one client, and that's how you retain them. You get their auto, the home, the life, the commercial business. And if you had all of that, your chances are that you would retain that business over, the course of 5-6 years, if not longer. However, just like the salesperson that wants that quick sale and then moves to the next person, there are buyers like that as well, and they're called shoppers.
Yeah.
They're the ones that shop their insurance every single year. So are they really a qualified prospect for you? Yes, they are looking for insurance, but they're not looking for a specific insurance need, their only need is price.
Yeah.
So you'll do all of this work, bringing in their other products, only for them to shop you next year and then hold you hostage to those prices they came up with.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So, when you're qualifying prospects, a lot of people come into they have this idea that if there's a need, then they're a fit. And that's not necessarily true. So I know you can talk about that too.
You made so many good points there, and certainly the buyer who buys on price is usually the first to complain and the first to leave. So we have to be very careful with those. And one of the challenges as well for salespeople is inbound inquiries. The qualification criteria seems to go out the window when someone phones you. Just because they phoned you doesn't mean they're qualified. It may still just mean they're interested, and we still need to qualify them. It seems easier to qualify on an outbound call or a face-to-face meeting, but inbound, it's just as important. Otherwise, you just think, oh, wow, someone's phoned me, and I'll jump through every hoop going, and I'll do a proposal for them, and I'll let them control me, and I'll do some free consultancy for them and give them loads of advice and put all my best ideas in a proposal because they phoned me. Actually, we've got to qualify those people just as hard as we would if it was an outbound prospecting piece of activity as well.
Salespeople, we have to talk in generalities here because every industry and every market is a little different when it comes to qualifying. Everybody kind of has their niche on what qualifying a prospect would. But can you give tips to the listeners, Simon, of kind of a general process that you teach for qualifying prospects?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say absolutely exactly what you've just said there. We talk about the general prospecting. So really for me, there's two levels of prospecting. So one is the overarching stuff. It is, does the prospect have a pain, a problem that I can fix? Am I talking to the right person? Do they have the authority to make the decision, or at the very least strongly influence decision? Is there a consequence to them not purchasing? So if they decide not to go ahead and solve that problem, what is the implication? What is the consequence? Are they losing X amount of money per month because they don't have the solution in place? So what happens in 6 months if they haven't fixed it now? Are they the right kind of business I want to deal with? Are they the right size of business? Do they have a good credit rating, etc.? And what are their timescales? Are they realistic timescales? What's their timescales for making a decision? What's their timescales for implementing the solution? I mean, they are the overarching that I would always say look at. Then depending on your sector, you'll have specific criteria. So maybe you sell software. So now you want to know what systems they've got in place, how many potential users. Maybe you're a commercial cleaning company, so now you care how big the office is, how many offices they have. So you've got the pain, the authority, the consequence, are they the target audience and their timescales, but then you've got specific things. So for you and I, as sales trainer, sales coach, one question we would use to qualify is, how many salespeople have they got? If they've got one, it still might be of interest. If it's got 10, 20, 30, then we know it's a bigger opportunity for us. So different levels of qualification.
In your coaching and training, what do you think is the biggest mistake that salespeople make in either qualifying prospects? Because what I see a lot of salespeople doing is they make assumptions as they're qualifying, that instead of asking the question, they make the assumption that they know the answer. And a lot of times you can be fooled by those assumptions.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
What are some of the pitfalls that you see that your own coaching clients make as far as qualifying prospects?
Well, the big assumption, and we've all fallen into this trap, is being deceived by someone's fancy job title.
That is a really good one. Yes.
Yeah, you think you're talking to the decision maker. You've not asked, but they've got a very nice job title. So you just make that assumption you're dealing with them, and they won't tell you they're not, because they've got pride and they don't want to be. If you were to ask them directly whether they were, not that you'd use this, you wouldn't say, "Are you the decision maker?" But if you'd ask that something to identify that, they might say yes because they don't want to admit they're not. And you've got to be very careful how you handle identifying who the decision maker is. But we've all made the wrong assumption. And I have done it, and I've done it far too many times over the years, and it's an easy one to fall back into the trap of, because a lot of companies give away, certainly in the UK, will give you a fancy job title and a fancy company car instead of a pay rise. So there is a lot of people in the UK with job titles that start off as director of or head of, and I can assure you they're not director or head of anything. It's just a fancy job title. So you'll be very, very careful. Probably get into trouble for that.
I don't know about the UK, but in the USA, in the banking industry, everybody's the vice president of something.
Yeah, absolutely. In the UK, we don't have the job title of vice president unless it's an American or Australian or something own business. But
really?
Yeah, but they're always called directors, director of this or head of that, or yeah. I know too many people who are called head of sales. Let's say, for example, and you say, well, how many salespeople do you have working for you? And it's none. They are head of sales, sales manager, sales. They are everybody, and but they get their fancy job title. A job title means a lot in the UK. People are very vain when it comes to job titles. You'll see, you've seen it on LinkedIn. The amount of what it says on their actual job description versus what they write on LinkedIn can be miles apart. The job title says sales manager. LinkedIn says head of global sales strategy or something. So yeah, that's a real big assumption. Who are you really dealing with? Yeah.
So if you're in the middle of qualifying a prospect, Simon, I'm big on timelines. Creating a timeline, and sometimes the CRMs out there that salespeople use, they don't do a good job of creating these timelines. But I feel they're really important for you to create a timeline in order for you to move that sale through that sales process. But even qualifying a prospect, it may take more than one face-to-face meeting or one phone call. Surprises come up.
Yeah, the best way of dealing with timescales is post-it notes. Get your post-it notes out. Find out when they're looking to have the project implemented. So put that on one side of the wall. Today's date on the other side of the wall. You give them half the post-it pad, and you go, right, you put post-its for everything that needs to happen from your end to make this happen by that date. We'll do the same, and then you just take a photo of it all, and then you can hold everybody else accountable. That's a really easy, that's a collaborative way of selling. If they want
that is really good, Simon. That's a good tip.
If they want it to happen, and that's a good way of qualifying it, if they want it to happen by that date, what has to happen at their end? Because salespeople are very good at telling them what has to happen from our side. But what happens from then? How do they get approval? Who else has to be involved in the different elements? Do they have to put a project team together? How long does that take? If it has to be signed off by the board, how often do the board meet? And get some real figures on those post-it notes, stick them all on their wall. And that's when you start getting creative and moving things around. And all of it, you'll soon find out whether they're not really interested if you start doing that kind of stuff. I love sticking post-it notes to people's walls. You start to take over it. I love that collaborative sell, because that's when you do that kind of stuff, you knock out half the objections because you're working to the same goal.
That I really, really love that. From a mindset point, what that is doing when you're both creating that timeline together, you are anchoring that prospect, that qualified prospect to you. And that is really powerful. Salespeople, you should do this tip because I'm going to do it. I'm going to start doing it. That's a really good tip. Plus, it gives you a visual too. And most people react to visual cues, and that's what that is. You know, plus, I know you've done this in your life too, Simon, as a salesperson. You get deep into the process and then you realize, wait a minute, you know, this really isn't qualified. Well, creating that timeline helps eliminate that, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You without having to ask lots of questions, they're giving you back lots of answers. You can ask a few, they will fill in all the blanks. They will give you answers to questions you may not have ever thought of asking because you don't know what their internal process is. And if you ask them directly what their buying process is, you're only going to get pieces of the jigsaw. But when they start putting post-its on the wall, and especially, this is especially good if there's a couple of you from your side and a couple of them from their side, or a few, you know, and everyone gets involved. You know, it's almost a case of the more the better in that scenario. You know, because everyone, you know, because you can, you know, someone from your side can work with them, and you can have somebody on your. And obviously, the more complex the sale as well, obviously the more post-its you're going to go, and then someone just has to either write it down or just take a photo or a video, and then type it all up, send it to everybody afterwards, and say, "Oh, we agreed on this," and that will then form the basis potentially of a contract and future proposal, and then contracts, and there's a lot to it. Yeah.
The other thing I can see happening is, I bet when you're doing this with them, physically doing this with them, that all of a sudden somebody will probably think about, well, what about this? What about that? And fill in the gaps that may have been missed without doing that exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something very real about a book of post-it notes. You know, you're actually doing stuff together, and can I borrow your pen? And all of a sudden you're working together, and you're kind of rubbing shoulder to shoulder doing stuff, you know, and it breaks down barriers and helps build rapport. And it's a great way of doing it. It'd be very hard for a competitor to then come in a couple of hours later if you've done that in a first meeting or something, and then a competitor comes in. If they don't equal what you've just done, they won't stand a chance.
I love that. Yeah. You know, I'm going to ask you this question. So if you're to present against competitors, because when I was in group benefits, you know, it was always, there's a final meeting. They're trying to pick between a couple of vendors to go with, and you'd have to go in and do a final presentation. And I always asked to be last.
Okay.
I always wanted to have the other vendors go first because I wanted to come in at the very end and show just how different I was compared to everybody else. I wanted to leave that lasting impression.
Yeah, and the advantage of going last is if you go first, they might ask you, let's say they ask you 5 questions. You go, but then the next person, they think of another question. By the time you go, they ask you all the questions. But for them to consider the first person, they have to go back to them and ask them all the missing questions again. So they might as well just stay with you. So I can definitely see the advantage of going last.
Yeah, so salespeople always present last.
Yeah, no, that's a great tip. That's a really, really good tip. Yeah. Sometimes you can't choose, but if you can, like you say, I mean, if you could just be upfront and say, look, I'd like to go last, no one's really going to go no, are they? They'll go, yeah, right, whatever. They don't. There's no preference for them. What about if there's a question for you then? So what if that was going to be over maybe a 2 or 3 week period, just because diaries and schedules and stuff? Would you still want to go last, even if you were going to be a couple of weeks after the first person had presented?
I would, but typically in the group benefits arena, they all did it in the same day.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So it was a whole day process, and what also happened, Simon, is they would, some businesses would bring all the vendors in together, and then you'd have to wait your turn and sit there and look at each other.
Okay, yes, yeah, it is nice. Well, you'll have done this as well. When you go into a big any company, you have to sign in. I always flick through the previous few pages to see who else has signed in, to see if any of my competitors have been in. Yeah, I mean, that's just an old school tip, isn't it? But always look through the signing in book, see who else has been there.
I never put my real name down.
Oh, I've walked in and had my name up on the board. The company welcome.
Happened, right?
But no, I've always put my real name, to be fair. But I always look through. That's my first boss said, always look through and see who's there before you.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I just revealed one of my tricks. And in the group benefits arena, it was one of the most brutal products I had ever sold. It was so freaking competitive all the time. Yeah. I mean, it was bad, but I enjoyed it. Yeah. All right. Any other advice you can give on qualifying prospects?
Well, I'd say always do it, and I'd also say always qualify. You just don't jump in that car. As keen as you are to get that commission, to earn that, for that month, do qualify. It's the biggest mistake salespeople make, really, is spending their time with the wrong prospects. There's a stat, and it depends on sector. So again, we're talking generally. I don't always focus so much on whether they have the budget at the early stages, because if I can find a pain that's causing them a big enough problem, they will find the budget. And some stats for the UK, I don't know if it's the same in the US, is that 70% of projects are unbudgeted. They will find the money. Now, that's not going to be the same in every sector. Some sectors you've got to ask the budget question. But certainly for a lot of the consultancy stuff that I've done, it's more about me going in, finding a problem, showing them how much it's costing them, and then when we come to doing questions, actually, when we talk about the kind of questions to ask, we'll cover that, because certainly we can use the spin selling, the situation, the problem, the implication, and the need to pay off, which we'll cover at a later date. If you can find a big enough implication, you can really, they'll find money.
One of the, you're right, they will find money. One of the things that I've had come up recently from people that I've coached is, and we're going back to assumptions, when they're given a referral, they make an assumption that they're a fit because this is a referral from a customer that loves them, and they make the assumption that it's the same type of business, the same, not necessarily the same need, but the same fit. And this just came up last week, and I told the salesperson, you still have to go through the qualifying process with them. Yeah. You still have to. And she said to me, yeah, I made an assumption that it was a lot like the customer that referred me to this person. Yeah. So those are, and what happens, Simon, is salespeople get so busy. They get so overwhelmed. They've got emails they have to return. They've got to, close the next deal. They've got to go through their, they've got all the balls in the air tossing. And so they take a slight shortcut, make an assumption, and then they find out they're dead wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah, I've got a great quote on my wall. I think I might have told you this one before, but the road to a sale gets longer with every shortcut you take.
Yeah.
And that's by an American called Jay Jensen. But I love that quote. I think I've actually got that on my website as well. It's such a great one, that quote. Yeah, we all take shortcuts if we're not careful.
and it's easy to do. And then when you take your first shortcut, then you'll take your next one, and then you'll take your next one. And then before you know it, you're compromising your sales process and your qualifying process.
Yeah.
So, you know, Simon has said this in other videos, salespeople. He is all about the process. He is very strong in processes, no matter, you know, whether it's qualifying the prospect or closing the sale. And a lot of times, all of that gets lumped into a sales process, when actually every part of the sale has its own process.
Yeah, yeah. You've
You
got the
know?
sales process, and then in each part is the selling process. And yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If we don't follow the process, we get problems. And certainly when we come to talk on a video about objection handling, so many objections are because we're missing steps in the process. We're rushing the prospect. We're not, you know, we're skipping things, and that's why we're getting the objections. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, another video with Simon and his great tips. Here's my post-it notes, Simon.
Excellent. No, you can't beat them. Yeah.
Everybody's going to have their walls lined with post-it notes now.
Don't send me the bill if the plaster pulls off.
Right, right. And when you actually get to go out and do face-to-face calls, make sure your car's stocked with post-it notes.
Oh yeah. I've got loads.
All righty. Well, until next time, thank you, Simon, so much for your time and your expertise.
Thank you. Thanks. See you again soon.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.